Hello and welcome to the Bhagavatam. Today, I'd like to ask you something. When someone asks you or tells you about God, what comes to your mind? Do you think of an old man in the clouds, the way Michangelo painted him? Do you think of someone who is angry and sits on a throne of judgment and sends people to heaven or hell? Do you think of him as the Son of God who died for your sins, part of a trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit? Do you think of him as wanting to convert everyone to his way? His way is the only way. And those who don't believe that way should be considered as infidels and killed, as in some religions. Or maybe you've rejected religion and become spiritual, and now you feel that God is some vague notion of light and love. I'm not going to discuss and debate these various opinions, but I want to tell you that none of them inspires me. I have no interest in the God of religion or his nemesis, the devil. To me, all these concepts ring hollow and feel empty. The followers of all these paths neither exhibit, in my opinion, a true love for God nor of each other. They use their religion to divide themselves from their fellow humans. They have made God an object of their ego. My God is better than your God, just as they think that my country is better than yours. My car, my house, my wife, etc., husband, whatever, is better than yours. Ultimately, I am better than you. Is God really a plaything for our ego to feel good? Is that what it's come down to? In Sanatana Dharma, which is commonly called as Hinduism, is based on the 5,000-year-old books of wisdom called the Vedas. In this process, in this way of life, in this system of knowledge, everyone is free to find their own version of God, to be attracted to whatever calls them. You are given hundreds of choices, ranging from atheism to pantheism to polytheism and monotheism. It is up to you to inquire, to contemplate, and to use your mind and intelligence to understand this king of all knowledge, as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Raja Vidya, the most important thing we're here to learn in this journey called life. What is that? Who am I? And who or what is my source or God? Allow me to present you a vision of God so delightful, so endearing, so captivating and lovable that once you listen with an open mind, you will find yourself hungry to know more and more. As I mentioned, today let's talk about the sweetness of God. And to open up with, I'm going to read you a few verses from a beautiful poem that has withstood the test of time. It is so incredibly beautiful. This is called Madhuram, Madhurashtakam. And it goes like this. Adharam madhuram vadanam madhuram nayanam madhuram hasitam madhuram hridayam madhuram gamanam madhuram madhuradhipate akhilam madhuram. What does that mean? It means that God, or Krishna as we call him, look on that image, meditate on that image, hold that image in your heart for a moment, and then listen to what the meaning of those words is. His lips are sweet, his face is sweet, his eyes are sweet, his smile is sweet, his gait or his walk is sweet. Everything is sweet about the emperor of sweetness. Vachanam madhuram, charitam madhuram, vasanam madhuram, valitam madhuram, chalitam madhuram, brahmitam madhuram, madhuradipate, akhilam madhuram. Once again, meditate on the image. Take in the beauty of Krishna. Close your eyes for a moment and listen. His words are sweet, his character is sweet, his dress is sweet, his belly folds are sweet, his movements are sweet, his wandering is sweet. Everything is sweet about the Emperor of Sweetness. Venur madhuro, renur madhura, panir madhura, padau madhura, nrityam madhuram, sakhyam madhuram, madhuradipate rakhilam madhuram. Once again, meditate on the image of Krishna and Radha, his masculine and feminine forms. God is not just masculine, he is masculine and feminine, both simultaneously. His flute is sweet, the dust of his feet is sweet, his hands are sweet, his feet are sweet, his dancing is sweet, his friendship is sweet. Everything is sweet about the Emperor of Sweetness. Geetam madhuram pitam madhuram bhuktam madhuram suptam madhuram rupam madhuram tilakam madhuram madhuradipate akhilam madhuram. Once again, feast your eyes on the beauty, the sweetness of every aspect of the form of the divine couple, Radha and Krishna. And the verse says, his singing is sweet, his yellow cloth that he wears is sweet, his eating is sweet, his sleeping is sweet, his beauty is sweet, his tilak is sweet, everything is sweet about the Emperor of Sweetness. So why did I talk about this? Because in contrast to all the Abrahamic religions, this is an image of the sweetness of God. But there is also a whole other side in which he's protective, in which during the time of Krishna you see many asuras or demonic characters, atheistic characters who hated God, wanted to kill him. And how he protected not only himself but also his devotees. So he could not be killed, not by some king or emperor or anybody. He finally left when he wanted to, as part of his own leela or pastimes. So the chapter we're reading from is called Nanda Maharaj Saved and Shankachuda Slain. So we're talking about two different characters. So today's Bhagavatam is going to be about two different things. The first is a chapter about how God protects his devotees. And the second will narrate the way his devotees love him. Okay, so we'll get to see more about that sweetness of love. See, the point is that if you have God who can't protect you, then what's the good of that? And if you have God that doesn't love you and you've got to perform and you've got to prove, then what good is that? That's not love. So one day the cowherd people of Vrindavan, the cowherd men specifically of Vrindavan, were eager to take a trip to worship Shiva. And they traveled by bullock carts to the Ambika forest. Now, you might wonder, if they are devotees of Krishna, then why are they worshipping Shiva? In an earlier time, Krishna had asked for his father not to worship Indra, the god of rain, and the heavenly, he's in charge of the heavenly kingdoms. But yet here, they're going to worship Shiva, and Krishna's got no objection to that. That's no problem. Because in fact, Shiva and Krishna, people won't accept this. They're now different. Shiva is Vishnu taking a form in this world, being in charge of the tamagun, the mode of ignorance, and taking charge of the aspect of destruction of the universe at the end of time. So, Shiva is no different than Krishna in that sense. He is part of Vishnu. He is part of... That's why it is said that Shiva and Vishnu are like milk and yogurt. Yogurt is no different than milk, and yet it is different. They are same and different at the same time. Anyways, so they'd gone to worship Shiva, at a beautiful temple in the forest of Ambika. And on arriving there, they bathed in the Saraswati river and then devotedly worshipped the powerful Shiva, or Pashupati, that's another name for him, and his consort goddess Ambika. The cowherd men then gave the Brahmins, the priests, gifts of cows, gold, clothing, and cooked grains mixed with honey. They then prayed, "May the Lord be pleased with us. May Shiva be pleased with us." Nanda and his friends Sunanda and the other cowherd men spent that night on the bank of the river Saraswati, strictly observing their vows. They had been fasting and were taking only water. During the night, a huge and extremely hungry snake appeared in that thicket. Yeah, a big, huge, hungry snake appeared. And slithering on his belly, he went up to the sleeping King Nanda and began swallowing him up. In the clutches of the snake, Nanda, the father of Krishna, cried out, "Krishna, Krishna, my dear boy, this huge serpent is swallowing me. Please save me. I'm surrendered unto you." When the cowherd men heard the cries of Nanda, who was their king, they came out to protect him. They beat the serpent with blazing torches. But that didn't help. And even though the blazing torches were burning him, the serpent would not release King Nanda. Then Krishna, the master and protector of his devotees, came to the spot and touched the snake with his foot. At that moment, all the sinful reactions of the snake were destroyed by the touch of the Supreme Lord's divine foot. And thus he gave up his serpent body and appeared in the form of who he really was, Vidyadhar. He was a person from the heavenly planets, which are called Vidyadharas. Krishna then questioned this personality who was standing before him with his head bowed, his brilliantly effulgent body bedecked with golden necklaces. Remember now, the snake was dead, and the Vidyadhar, this particular denizen or inhabitant of the heavenly planets, now appeared standing in front of Krishna with his brilliantly effulgent body bedecked with golden necklaces. Krishna asked him, "My dear sir, you appear so wonderful, glowing with such beauty. Who are you, and who forced you to assume this terrible form of a snake?" The Vidyadhar said his name was Sudarshan. And he replied, see, the Vidyadhars are actually wisdom holders. They are the inhabitants, it is said in the purport, the inhabitants of both Siddhalok and Vidyadharlok. That means they have their own realm, their own planets or realm, and are naturally endowed with mystic yogic powers by which they not only can fly in outer space without a vehicle, but can also fly from one planet to another simply by exerting their will. Just as fish can swim within water, the residents of Vidyadhar Lok can swim in the ocean of air, or even across space. As far as the inhabitants of Siddhalok are concerned, they are endowed with all mystic powers. The yogis in this planet practice the eightfold yoga mysticism, namely Yam, Niyam, Asana, Pranayam, Pratyahar, Dharana, Dhyan, and Samadhi. These are all different yogic practices, including meditation, and the ultimate goal of all those meditative practices leads to finally Samadhi, where you are in the state of enlightenment, by which they attain various perfections. They can become smaller than the smallest, heavier than the heaviest. They can get anything from anywhere. There's just a whole lot of siddhis, as they are called. They can even manufacture anything they want, manufacture a planet. They don't need factories to do that. They don't need big, huge processes and workers and laborers and all of that industry. They can manufacture it by thought. They can get whatever they like and control whatever person they want. all the residents of Siddhaloka are naturally endowed with these mystic yogic powers. It is certainly a very wonderful thing if we see a person on this planet flying in the sky without a vehicle. But in Vidyadhar Lok, such flying is as commonplace as a bird's flying in the sky out here. So the person, the Vidyadhar resident, whose name was Sudarshan said, I was very opulent and beautiful. I used to wander freely in all directions in my airplane. So he had a airplane, he had a Viman. Once I saw some sages of the lineage of Angira Muni. Proud of my beauty, I ridiculed those sages, and because of my sin, they made me assume this lowly form as a serpent. It was actually for my benefit that those merciful sages cursed me, since now I have been touched by the foot of the supreme spiritual master of all worlds and have thus been relieved of all inauspiciousness. So he's recognizing that behind the curse of those sages was a great blessing. And that blessing was that now Krishna himself, the supreme being, the supreme Godhead, who had appeared in Vrindavan at this time, had touched him with his foot, his divine lotus feet. And by the blessings of that sacred touch, he had been freed of all karma, of all sinful reaction, and had now been released from the curse of being in that serpent body, and had emerged in his original form as Vidyadhar. And he was going to go back to his spiritual to his planet in the heavenly realms. So now in the Vedas, they don't talk about heaven as some place, where you go after you die and it's just like either you go to heaven or hell. No. They talk about how there are heavenly planets and hellish planets. Hellish planets have more suffering in them. Heavenly planets have more pleasures in them. But none of them are permanent. Krishna says in the Gita, he says, whether you go to the highest planets, the most heavenly and most beautiful of all planets, places with mystic powers like we talked about right now, or whether you go to the most hellish of planets, all of them are temporary. Everything in this world is temporary. And either way, one will have to come back and take birth again and again and again. But he says, one who comes to my abode never returns to this temporary and miserable world. So he refers to Krishna as Guru, the spiritual master, the Lord of all the worlds, Loka. He says, with your foot, when you touched me, you destroyed all inauspiciousness, all that was unclean or dirty or inappropriate within my heart. You removed all the impurities within me. You purified me. You made me a new person. And that is the effect of coming in contact with God. It's not about some belief. It's about actual transformation. Being in touch with the Supreme Being through his name, form, or pastimes as we're reading right now, purifies the heart and purifies the mind. And you'll find that if you take time to read these texts and to understand them more deeply, they will cleanse the impurities within our heart and make us kinder, gentler, sweeter, more loving, more compassionate, more of who we really are at a soul level. So then he says, and this is the Vidyadhar person whose name is Sudarshan. He says, you destroy, he's telling Krishna, you destroy all fear for those who, fearing this material world, take shelter of you. In other words, whoever takes shelter of you, they find themselves becoming fearless. How can one become fearless? That means, like, fear, isn't that the basis of anxiety? Isn't that the basis of all our existence? Everything we do is because of fear. We try to get a house. Why? We don't want to be homeless. We don't want to be on the street. We work at a job just so that, we can make sure we have the means to live in this world. We do everything, insurance policies, healthcare, whatever it is we do because there is fear. I need to take care of this body and mind. I need to take care of myself. And so I do what I have to do. But behind it all is a deep fear, a fear of being able to survive. I mean, after all, there is one thing that all of us are fearful of, and that is death. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to discuss it. But it is behind everything we're doing. Even when we are avoiding facing these kind of topics, we're getting busy with, let's say, the internet or movies or Instagram or whatever it is that you're used as a distraction. It is to distract yourself from your thoughts. It is to distract yourself from your emotions. It is to distract yourself from your weaknesses and your fallibility and the feeling that I'm not good enough, that something is wrong with me, and all this crap that our mind keeps feeding us. To try to run away from that, we take shelter of any kind of distraction, a video game, a drug, an alcohol, or sex, you name it, whatever we can do just to get away from this thing. But the truth is that one who comes on this path faces their fear, takes shelter of that supreme being, and realizes that, hey, I'm a spiritual being. I am indestructible. Nothing can destroy me. I take shelter of the Supreme Being because in that union, in that yoga, I am protected, I am safe, and therefore I become free of all fear. So he says, by the touch of your feet, I am now freed from the curse of the sages. O destroyer of distress, please let me return to my planet. What a beautiful way to refer to Krishna, destroyer of distress. How does one become free from distress? How does one become free of suffering? After all, suffering is going to happen. Problems are going to take place. Bad things are going to happen. They're going to happen to everybody. They're going to happen to me, to you, to everybody we know. They're going to happen to the greatest of saints, and they're going to happen to the greatest of sinners. There's going to always be problems. There's always going to be some kind of thing going on that we have to deal with. So how is it that once, you can say that, oh, you are the destroyer of distress? How is that? See, there's two kinds of distress. There's the distress that is caused by the circumstances, the situation, the person, the body, the mind. There's that external distress. And then there is the distress that is caused within us, how we respond to what goes on in our life. That is 90% of it. I'd say 10% is the situation and 90% is our reaction to the situation, what we make of it, how we interpret it, how we turn it around in our mind, and how we ultimately react to it. So what does it mean, destroyer of distress? It means that as you come in alignment with the divine, as you come in alignment with your own true self, you no longer identify with this mind or this body or this ego. You no longer identify with the organism. You realize I am much more than that. And so even if somebody insulted this body, even if somebody did something that was attacked my ego or did something that was in some way harmful, they didn't touch me. They don't even know me. They don't know who I am. Right? And if they did know who I am, if they did know me as a soul, if they knew me for my real self, part of God, they would also know that I am no different than they are. And that in that sense, we're the same. And if I'm flawed, they are flawed too. We're just all flawed in different ways. Our personalities are flawed, our body, mind, organisms are flawed, but that's about it. At the core, we're the same. We're all spiritual beings having this incredible journey of life. So then he continues, O Master of mystic power, O great personality, O Lord of the devotees, I surrender to you. Please command me as you will, O Supreme Godhead, Lord of all lords of the universe. So he calls Krishna here Mahayogi, the greatest of all possessors of mystic power, Mahapurusha, the greatest of all personalities, Sarvaloka Ishvara, that is the controller of all controllers, of the supreme controller. And the same thing is said in the Brahma Samhita, where Brahma says, Ishvara Parama Krishna Sachidananda Vigraha Anadir Adir Govinda Sarva Karana Karanam. What does that mean? It says, Krishna, who is known as Govinda, is the supreme Godhead. He has an eternal, blissful, spiritual body. He is the origin of all. He has no other origin and is the prime cause of all causes. Means he's the cause behind all causes of everything in this universe, including the good, the bad, and the ugly, all of it. Yes. Some people ask, well, who, if God created us, then who created God? Well, that's a very simple answer to that. Krishna gives that in the Bhagavad Gita, where he says, never was there a time when I did not exist, Krishna is saying, nor you, nor all these kings, and never will there be a time when we shall cease to be. So he's saying we're all eternal beings. It's not like that God has a beginning or you have a beginning. No, none of us has a beginning. None of us has an origin. He is the source of everything and the origin in that sense. But we have existed eternally, and God exists eternally as well. Then Sudarshan says, "O infallible one, I was immediately freed from the curse of the sages simply by seeing you. Anyone who chants your name purifies all who hear his chanting as well as himself. How much more beneficial then is the touch of your lotus feet." So just by hearing the name of the divine, of Krishna, you get purified. Just by saying that name or chanting the mantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. That's an ancient mantra. And when you chant that mantra, it cleanses the heart. That's what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says. Cheto darpana marjanam. It is like, think of the heart as a mirror, and that mirror has become dirty and contaminated. And now we cannot see ourselves in the mirror because it is so dirty and contaminated. We see only the sort of distorted image in the mirror of who we, instead of seeing our real self. So that distorted image is that personality, is that who we think we are. But who we think we are is not who we are. Who we think we are is a concoction created by the mind. That concoction is based on what people told us, is based on what happened, and then the conclusions we derive from there. But is that really who we are? Because you existed even when you were born. Your soul existed even at the moment of your birth, and will exist even when you leave this body. So this body cannot be who you are. This mind, which was an accumulation of whatever programming we had and whatever thoughts were injected into us and whatever ways we were conditioned, that's not you either. So if you strip away the body, the mind, the ego, then what remains? That which remains is the self, the true self, the soul. And that's why meditation is so important. That's why the chanting of this mantra of God's name is so important, because it cleanses the heart so that we can see ourselves and experience who we really are. So then Sudarshan received the permission of Krishna and circumambulated, means walked around him, bowed down before him, offering homage, and then returned to his heavenly planet. Krishna's father, Nanda, was thus delivered from peril. And all of these stories are there to show us how Krishna is there protecting us from the worst of circumstances. Now, it's not that bad things don't happen, they do happen. But when we have a connection to a very powerful divine source, then he's there for us, protecting us. And it is my personal experience, I've seen it so many times. But what is very important is to be in a state of surrender. Because if we want to struggle, by all means, struggle. And see for yourself, how's life going for you? When you struggle and you work hard and you go through all the anxiety and all the fear and all the depression and all of that, is it working? But how about just trying a very simple thing, taking shelter of the divine, taking shelter of God, taking shelter of the most powerful of all beings, and recognizing and seeing for yourself how you are protected and taken care of. So the inhabitants of Vrindavan, which is where Krishna was living in that time, 5,000 years ago, they were astonished to see the mighty power of Krishna. They then completed their worship of Shiva and returned to Vrindavan. Along the way, they respectfully described Krishna's powerful acts. Now this is another incident now. Once Krishna and Balaram's his brother, the performers of wonderful feats, both of them, because Balaram is equally powerful as Krishna. They were playing in the forest at night. Now remember, they were young boys at this time, perhaps around 8, 10 years old. No? And they were playing with the young girls of Vrindavan. Krishna and Balaram wore flower garlands and spotless garments, and their limbs were beautifully decorated and anointed. The women sang their glories, the glories of Krishna and Balaram, in a charming way, bound to them by affection. So everybody loved Krishna. It's not that, there was any doubt about that. Everybody was in love with him. The boys loved him, the girls loved him, the parents loved him. Each one had a unique way of relating to him. Some loved him as their child. Some loved him as their lover. Some loved him as their buddy, their friend. Vrindavan was a place of no formality. Normally, the concepts of God that you'll come across in most religions are where God is great and we are small. So there's a big formality. God is sitting on a throne. We're supposed to obey. We're supposed to follow the orders. In Vrindavan, none of that is true. They're climbing on Krishna's shoulders. They're stealing his lunch. They're meeting him in the middle of the night, having romantic rendezvous. They're in love with him for who he is, and he does everything to be as mischievous and naughty and playful as he can, and they love him exactly the way he is. He doesn't want to be loved because he's God. He wants to be loved because he's who he is. So the young girls of Braj, the Vrindavan, they were very nicely dressed and anointed with pulp of sandalwood and decorated with flowers. So they had flowers in their hair, and the moon was shining in the sky. It was a full moon night, surrounded by glittering stars. The breeze was blowing, bearing the aroma of fragrant flowers, and the bumblebees were mad after the aroma. Taking advantage of the pleasing atmosphere, Krishna and his brother Balaram began to sing very melodiously. The gopis, the young girls, became so absorbed in the singing that they almost forgot themselves. Their hair loosened, their clothes slackened, and their garlands began to fall to the ground. Now, if you're new to all this, and if you haven't heard the earlier episodes where I've discussed this, you might wonder, well, what is he doing with all these girls? We tend to think in terms of our own context. And the reality is this, that if God loves people, he loves all of us. He doesn't just go out and find his one beloved. He already has that, Radha. But he wants to love everyone. And he wants to give everyone a chance to love him the way they want to love him. Not just love him based on some, dictatorial kind of system or hierarchical system, but the place of the heart. So Krishna is that embodiment of love. That place of the heart where we can come to him and pour our heart out and love him exactly the way our heart calls for. Now, the ones who were all of these girls who had gathered at night to be with him are the gopis. During the day, a lot of his male friends gathered around him, and they'd go out with their cows, and they'd go out and take care of the cows in the forest. They'd play games and do fun stuff and come, and the parents were there, loving them as a child, feeding him and bathing him and taking care of him and all of that stuff. So now the girls are here, and this is nighttime. And at this point, an associate of Kuber, who is the treasurer of the heavenly planets, appeared on the scene. This guy's name was Shankachuda, because on his head there was a valuable jewel resembling a conch shell. So a conch shell is this kind of big, huge white, it's hard, I should have put a picture there for you to see, but you blow on it and it gives this incredible sound. They do it during the worship. Anyways, he had this thing, a jewel on top of his head that he was wearing that resembled a conch shell. And just as earlier, we'd heard the story of the two sons of Kuber, who had been puffed up because of their wealth and opulence and did not care for the sages. And they had then been cursed to take birth as trees in Vrindavan. And Krishna had ultimately, even as a baby, ripped down those trees, and the two young men had come out of that. And then he'd released them from the curse that they'd had in for thousands of years, where they'd been there standing as those trees. So now Shankachuda, also puffed up by material opulence, thought that Krishna and Balaram were just two ordinary cowherd boys enjoying the company of many beautiful girls. And he says, hey, I want some of that fun too. Now, generally in the material world, a person who's with riches thinks that all beautiful women should be enjoyed by him. Shankachuda also thought that since he belonged to the rich community of Kuber, Kubera being the treasure of the devas, the demigods, he thought, I can have these girls. And that Krishna and Balaram should not enjoy the company of so many beautiful girls. He therefore decided to take charge of them. He appeared before Krishna, Balaram, and the gopis and began to lead the girls away to the north. He began to actually take them away from there, as you'll see here. He commanded them as if he was their proprietor, despite the presence of Krishna and Balaram. Being forcibly taken away by Shankachuda, the girls called out the names of Krishna and Balaram. Krishna, Balaram, help us! The two brothers immediately began to follow them, taking up big logs in their hands. Don't be afraid, they said. Don't be afraid. And they called to the gopis. We're coming at once to chastise this asura. Asura is, well, loosely translated as demon, though we don't mean the same thing as Hollywood movies with, guys with funny things on the so what do you call that? With horns and stuff like that. But we're talking about people who are atheistic. People who are demonic means people who do not have spiritual values, people who do not follow dharma. Those are people who are referred to in the Vedas as asura. Sura are those who are devas or demigods or in the mode of goodness, people who are following the principles of dharma. And those who are adharma, the opposite, those who do not follow dharma, they're called asura or demonic. So Shankachuda, thinking himself to be very powerful, when the brothers Krishna and Balaram reached him, he quickly left the company of the gopis and ran in fear for his life. But Krishna would not let him go. He entrusted the gopis to the care of Balaram, his brother, and then followed Shankachuda wherever he fled. Krishna wanted to take the valuable jewel from this guy, the jewel that resembled a conch shell, and that's what he did. So he chased him, and after following him a very short distance, Krishna caught him, struck his head with his fist, and killed him. He then took the valuable jewel and returned. And then in the presence of all the gopis, he presented the valuable jewel to his elder brother, Balaram. So once again, we see how the gopis were protected by Krishna. Now, all of this leads us to understand that when we take shelter of the divine, when we take shelter of God, He's there for us. This is the sort of lesson in here. I want to ask you, how is it for you when you don't have such a connection? And how is it if you do? If you do have a connection with God, how does it feel to have that protection? And how does it feel not to have such protection? What does it feel like to have to struggle in life, to do everything by yourself and not know, whether you're protected or not, to be at the mercy of this material world where everything is so unpredictable, where everything can be lost in a blink of an eye, whether that's the person you love, whether that's your possessions, whether that's your job, you never know. It's so unpredictable. That's why Krishna says this world is ashashvat, which means it is temporary. And it is dukhalayam, full of miseries and full of suffering. Yes, there are pleasures, of course. And yes, there is fun to be had. But there is always something lurking in the corner. We never know when a situation can arise where someone gets sick or someone dies or we just don't never know. We're now going to come across the other flip side of this. So there were two little stories we heard about where Krishna protected his devotees, and now we're going to come across the way his devotees love him. We're going to see how the gopis will sing of Krishna as he wanders in the forest. So who are the gopis? There's the young women of Vrindavan. Remember, Krishna was not quite 10, 11 years old, and yet he was very much older in many ways. He was very expert in loving. Now, he's responding to each person according to the way they love him. And so you see with the gopis, they're the most beautiful women in the world. So whenever Krishna went to the forest, the minds of the gopis would run after him. They were always thinking of him. Krishna says this in the Gita, Man mana bhava mad bhakto mad yaji mam namaskuru. Always think of me. Always think of me. Become my devotee. Give your love to me. Now, you might say, that's hard to do. I can't always think about God. Well, yeah, but when you're in love with someone, notice what happens. You're always thinking about that person. So that's why Krishna is so beautiful, so attractive. He attracts us. And when we become attractive, when we open ourselves up to that possibility, when we fall in love with him, then what happens is our mind is naturally attracted, just as it is when we are in love. The same thing happens here. So when he would go to the forest with his male friends and they would take care of the cows because they were dairy community, during that time, the girls, the gopis, their minds would run after him, and thus the young girls sadly spent their days singing of his pastimes. So how would they keep themselves busy? While they're doing their household chores and duties, they would keep talking about his pastimes. So what would they talk about? Let's see. This is how they were. They'd be just talking, remembering, and maybe even acting out his different pastimes in Leela, and how he'd play the flute, and how he'd kill various demons, and how the fun things he would do, all of that. The gopis said, when Krishna vibrates the flute he has placed on his lips, stopping its holes with his tender fingers, he rests his left cheek on his left arm and makes his eyebrows dance. At that time, the demigoddesses traveling in the sky with their husbands, the siddhas, become amazed. As those ladies listen, they are embarrassed to find their minds yielding to the pursuit of lusty desires, and in their distress they are unaware the belts of their garments are loosening. So this is an interesting piece of information here. They're talking about alien beings, essentially, traveling in what would be called vimana. And these vimans, there are pictures actually that were given, and they're very similar to what we have. If you look at some of these pictures here, you'll see that they're very similar. You're not going to see it on Instagram. It's cropping them off. Do know that if sometimes you see them cropped up, that you'll see them in on my YouTube videos. But I'll try and give you another one of the pictures. So this is an example of a viman. They could literally be like a small town or a city, which is flying around like UFOs. Anyways, so the demigoddesses, the wives of the demigods, would be flying with their husbands, and they'd find themselves so attracted to Krishna. They'd be watching from their viman, and they would become so drawn to the Leela, to the pastimes. And this picture also tries to capture that. You can see them. They're not visible, but they're still seeing. They were embarrassed to find their minds yielding to the pursuit of lusty desires, and in their distress they were unaware that the belts of their garments were loosening, it says here. So the gopis say, "O girls, this son of Nanda who gives joy to the distressed bears unsteady lightning on his chest and has a smile with a jeweled necklace. Now please hear something wonderful. When he vibrates his flute, the bulls, the deer, the cows, standing in groups at a great distance, are all captivated by the sound, and they stop chewing the food in their mouth, and they cock their ears. Stunned, they appear as if asleep, or like figures in a painting." My dear gopis, sometimes Mukunda or Krishna imitates the appearance of a wrestler by decorating himself with leaves, peacock feathers, and colored minerals. Then in the company of his brother Balaram and the cowherd boys, he plays his flute to call the cows. At that time, the rivers stop flowing. So this is Krishna and Balaram. Krishna's got the flute in his hand. He plays his flute to call the cows. At that time, the rivers stop flowing, their waters stunned by the ecstasy they feel as they eagerly wait for the wind to bring them the dust of his lotus feet. But like us, gopis, the rivers are not very pious, and thus they merely wait with their arms trembling out of love. So this is how Krishna and Balaram go with their cows and with their friends. Playfully spending their days. So you wonder, what does God do? Well, he's having a good time. That's all I can tell you. He's always having a good time. And even if there are attacks on him or his loved ones, he's having a good time, killing off those demons, knocking them out of the scene, and then continuing to go back to playing and having a good time. Why does he come here to show us his pastimes and his leela? To attract us back to him, to say, hey, this place isn't for you. This is not your eternal home. Your home is with me. Come back. He comes to show us what it's like to be with God. Krishna moves about the forest in the company of his friends who vividly chant the glories of his magnificent deeds. He thus appears just like the supreme Godhead, exhibiting his inexhaustible opulences. When the cows wander into the mountainsides and Krishna calls out to them with the sound of his flute, the trees and creepers in the forest respond by becoming so luxuriant with fruits and flowers that they seem to be manifesting Vishnu within their hearts. As their branches bend low with the weight, the filaments of their trunks and vines stand erect out of ecstasy of love of God, and both the trees and creepers pour down a rain of sweet sap. You'll see this in Vrindavan when you go there, whenever, I hope someday you do. But you'll see the trees bowing down, literally. Like, trees are just incredible. You've never seen trees like this anywhere. Most trees stand tall and their branches go upward. But in Vrindavan, they go downward, as if to bow down, as if to welcome Krishna, as if to touch him. Maddened by the divine honey-like aroma of the tulsi flowers on the garland that Krishna wears, swarms of bees sing loudly for him, and that most beautiful of all persons thankfully acknowledges and acclaims their song by taking his flute to his lips and playing it. The charming flute song then steals away the minds of the cranes, the swans, and other lake-dwelling birds. Indeed, they approach Krishna, close their eyes, and maintaining strict silence, worship him by fixing their consciousness upon him in deep meditation. O gopis, O goddesses of Vrindavan, when Krishna is enjoying himself with Balaram, his brother, on the mountain slopes, playfully wearing a flower garland on the top of his head, he engladdens all with the resonant vibrations of his flute. Thus he delights the entire world. At that time, the nearby clouds, afraid of offending a great personality, thunder very gently in accompaniment. The cloud showers flowers onto his dear friend Krishna and shades him from the sun, just like an umbrella. Now the gopis start talking to Krishna's mother, Mother Yashoda. O Mother Yashoda, your son, who is expert in all the arts of herding cows, has invented many new styles of flute playing. Now, by the way, the gopis and all the people in Vrindavan, the village where Krishna was born and where he grew up, they do not know that he is the supreme Godhead. Well, at times they do, actually. But most of the time, he makes them forget. And so for most of the time, they talk about him as if he's an ordinary little boy. But he's just fascinating. He does incredible things. He does miraculous stuff. He does things that nobody could possibly do. And yet, they keep forgetting that, and they just love him the way he is. They don't love him because he's God. They love him for who he is. And that's the key. All of us want to be loved in that way too. We want to be loved for who we are, not because of what we have, not because of what we do. Although it's become very fashionable now to look for someone who, based on what they do and what they have and where they come from and what kind of, it's crazy. That's not pure love. That's business. That's just trying to manipulate things. That's trying to use someone. But pure love is, I love you for who you are, just the way you are, with all your flaws, with all your strengths, with all your good qualities, with all your bad qualities. That's love. Anyways, the gopis are saying to Yashoda, Yashoda, your son, who is expert in the arts of herding cows, has invented many new styles of flute playing. When he takes his flute to his wonderful bimba fruit-like red lips, and he sends forth the tones of the harmonic scale in variegated melodies. Even the devas, Brahma, Shiva, Indra, and all of them become confused upon hearing the sound, because that sound of his flute was so incredible. Although they are the most learned authorities, they cannot ascertain the essence of that music, and thus they bow down their heads and their hearts. So this is Mother Yashoda with Krishna. And at times, she's mad at him and punishes him. She treats him just like she would her ordinary little child, even though he's the supreme Godhead. As Krishna strolls through Vraja, Vrindavan, with his lotus petal-like feet, marking the ground with the distinctive emblems of flag, thunderbolt, lotus, and elephant goad. So Krishna has some very interesting patterns on his feet, which I think are worth looking at. This would be a normal footprint, right? But that is what the feet of Krishna look like, with all those kind of markings on his feet. He relieves the distress of the ground feels from the cow's hoofs, and as he plays his renowned flute, his body moves with the grace of an elephant. Thus we gopis who become agitated by Cupid when Krishna playfully glances at us, we stand as still as trees, unaware that our hair and garments are slackening. In other words, literally experiencing ecstasy as their hair, literally the hairs in the body start to stand on end. Now Krishna is standing somewhere counting his cows on a string of gems. He wears a garland of tulsi flowers that bear the resemblance of his beloved, and he has thrown his arm over the shoulder of an affectionate cowherd friend. As Krishna plays his flute and sings, the music attracts the black deer's wives who approach the ocean of transcendental qualities. And that's the deer. Yeah. And they're also in awe. And they approach Krishna, who is the ocean of transcendental qualities, and sit down beside him, just like us cowherd girls. They have given up all hope for happiness in family life. O Yashoda, that's Krishna's mother, your darling child, the son of Maharaj Nanda, has festively enhanced his attire with a jasmine garland, and he is now playing along the Yamuna in the company of the cows and cowherd boys, amusing his dear companions. The gentle breeze honors him with its soothing fragrance of sandalwood, while the various upadevas, that is, minor demigods like the Gandharvas, who are famous for their celestial music and dancing, are standing on all sides, offering their music, singing in tribute to Krishna. Out of great affection for the cows of Vrindavan, Krishna became the lifter of Govardhan Hill. At the end of the day, being rounded up by all his cows, he plays a song on his flute, while exalted demigods standing on the path worship him, his lotus feet, and the cowherd boys accompanying him chant his glories. Those are the lovely cows of Vrindavan. There is Krishna. He plays a song on his flute, which, while exalted devas or demigods standing along the path worship his lotus feet, and the cowherd boys accompany him chant his glories. His garland is powdered by the dust raised by the cow's hoofs, and his beauty, enhanced by his fatigue, creates an ecstatic festival for everyone's eyes. Eager to fulfill his friend's desires, Krishna is the moon arisen from the womb of Mother Yashoda. As Krishna respectfully greets his well-wishing friends, his eyes roll slightly as if from intoxication. He wears a flower garland, and the beauty of his soft cheeks is accentuated by the brilliance of his golden earrings, and the whiteness of his face, which has the color of a berry. With his cheerful face resembling the moon, the Lord of the night, the Lord of the Yadus, moves with the grace of a regal elephant. Thus he returns in the evening, delivering the cows of Vrindavan from the heat of the day. So there he is, coming back in the evening. In this way, during the daytime, the women of Vrindavan took pleasure in continually singing about the pastimes of Krishna with their minds and hearts absorbed in him. They were filled with the feeling of great festivity. So with that, we're done with the reading, and I would love to hear your thoughts. If you have any questions or comments, please write them down. I would love to answer any of your questions. I want you to know that this absorption, when you take and, when you actually feel the devotion and love for God in your mind and in your heart, life becomes, like they're saying here, a festival. You talk about him, you cannot get your mind off him. You begin to think of him all the time. And sometimes it's just the name. Just the name. Even the name can be so addictive that some people are there who find themselves chanting all day long. Krishna is no different than his name. He is no different than his form. He is no different than his pastimes. And in any way that we remember him, we're in touch with him. So at that point, we are connected. See, the name of God and God are no different. His form and he are no different. His pastimes and he are no different. So when we're in touch with him, we're in touch with a very, very high vibration, the highest vibration in the universe. And with that, our minds are no longer sucked into the troubles of this world. We are no longer captivated by the world. Yes, the world is there. We have to deal with it while we're here. But we are no longer the puppets of our mind. We are no longer the puppets of our desire. We are no longer the puppets of this world. We use the world. We live in it, definitely. But we are not controlled by it. And that's the difference. We have surrendered our heart, our mind, our soul to the Supreme Being, Krishna. So one who has done that becomes free, even in this life. This is called Jivan Mukta. You are not just liberated after you die, you go to some heaven or whatever, which we don't know. You are liberated here and now. And in here and now, you experience freedom from your torturous or tormenting mind, from the pains of the body, from the pains of your emotions, from the pains of attachment, from the pains of all the other kinds of suffering that are caused by nature, by other people, and even by your own body and mind. So therefore, when you are free of all of that, life becomes a great festival. What are your thoughts? What do you think of all this? What do you take away? Is there some way that you would like to experience this? Because this is not about believing something. This is not about going and, joining a club or joining some kind of group. This is not about joining. It's not about believing. It's not about some kind of faith. It is about experiencing. Consider the possibility, then act upon. So it's 3 steps. I call it theory, experiment, and conclusion. This is what you're reading is the theory. Now, act on it. Begin the process of hearing, of chanting, of connecting with the divine, with Krishna in this way. And as you do, you will experience within yourself this state of being liberated little by little by little. It'll happen step by step. And you'll notice it. It's tangible. It's real. I can speak to it because it is so for me as well. Not 100% there. There's a long ways to go. But I see it working, and I've seen it working for a long time. And so for the past 45 years that I've been practicing on this path, I've seen it transform me from the inside out. And I invite you to try out the same experiment. Try it out for yourself. To take up to the chanting of Krishna's name, to take up to reading about him. Read the Krishna book. You'll find it on Amazon. It's spelled differently. It's K-R-S-N-A. You can read that. That's got all the pastimes of Krishna in it. But if you want to do a deep dive, then read the Bhagavad Gita as it is. That is the version I recommend. Because it's written by or translated by or presented by a pure devotee of Krishna. And that's very important. It's someone. There are many people who are speculators, many people who are very knowledgeable, who are scholars, but we want someone who's a pure lover of God. That person can give us a much deeper understanding. All right, with that, I'm going to wind up. There are no questions, so I imagine you guys got it. You experienced this for yourself. Thank you so much for being here. It is such an honor to be able to serve you and to be able to support you on your journey. And I wish you all the best. I hope that you will take up these ideas and act on them and see for yourself. And I'll see you next week. I'll be here every Tuesday on 7 o'clock Pacific time, 10 p.m. Eastern. And if you're in India, then at 7:30 on Wednesdays, right? But otherwise, in the US, it's Tuesday. So look forward to seeing you next week. Hare Krishna.